So talk a little bit about your workflow or your process. Like, I know not every day is the same, but do you have a certain amount of, if you have a full schedule, like a limit of how many songs you would try to do in a day, or like a process to kind of get started when you come in the morning? Like,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, my process is I like to start EQing around 10 a.m. So I'm usually in here, 9:15, 9:30. I'll come in, put on a song or two that I'm familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
Not loud, or just low, just kind of in the background. Go through emails. And I'm kind of, as I'm going through emails and just sitting in the environment, I kind of feel like I'm subconsciously getting used to the room again, or just acclimating to the space.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll turn it up a little louder and sit and just listen to a song maybe. Again, something I know and I've done, and just to kind of get used to the room again, 30 seconds, a minute, and I'm like, all right, okay. And then I'll start, for example, if I have a record to do, say it's 10 or 11 songs, I'll just start working. But as far as what I like to do, ideally like a dozen songs a day is good. I can certainly do more, or sometimes less. But 12 is a nice average. I can work at a good clip. I don't feel like I'm rushing. I can take a lunch,
Mm-hmm.
eat. And that's a good balance. And Diana knows me. She's worked with me for years, almost 10 years. She's really good at finding space on the schedule for people. She knows that I don't want to stay too late.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get burnt out. So she's very good at keeping the schedule around there. And then as far as my workflow, once I actually start going, if it's a record, I like to know, the order of the songs, which I don't always get to know at the beginning of the day. Sometimes, you need that? You need to know the sequence? Well, if you want me to finish, I need to know. But psychologically, I like it. I like to know how they're picturing this whole thing, and I get a better sense of the ebb and flow. And I'll listen to a couple of songs, get a vibe, and just find a song or two that I think is kind of like their sound.
Okay.
If I'm working alone. And I'll just start working. Do a couple songs. And then I try to, I'll do the first 3 or 4 songs. I'm usually picking, the first 3, 4, or 5 songs. Because I always feel like those are here's how I like to say it. I always feel like the 4th song on a record is what a band really sounds like.
Okay.
And the first song is what they think they're supposed to sound like on this record. And the second song is close to that too. They're them and the record label, like, this is what we want people to hear. This is what we think is the right way for us to sound right now. Yeah. And by the time you get to the 4th song, I feel like this is what we really are, Yeah. This is how we sound. This is what we're good at. This is our wheelhouse.
So it's kind of like dating, right? It's like the first date is the show of,
right,
this is who I want you to think I am. And by date 3 or 4, it's,
this is who you really are?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's how I look at it. So I kind of keep that in mind as I'm working, because I just get a vibe. And sometimes you can, I want to pick certain songs based on the instrumentation. Say the first song is just a vocal and an acoustic guitar, and it's real mellow, and they want to set this cool vibe. But then by song 3, it's, full-on drums and rocking out.
Mm-hmm.
I'll probably start with the rocking out song. because I want to know how big this record's going to get. And then I can kind of have a much better sense of where the smaller, less flushed out instrumentation songs sit better. You know, I can judge the level of the vocal, and I'm adjusting my head to how this thing sounds. And I kind of just move closer, and then all of a sudden, after a couple songs, I get like this feeling like, oh, I'm locked in. I know, and I'm like, oh, you know, now that I've worked on this, I feel like I really hear what they're doing, and I'm going to go back to that first song because I think it needs a little more like this. Mm-hmm. And then there's like this excitement because I feel, oh yeah, I get excited about the record, and I'm locked in, and I'm enjoying it, and I'm like, everything just goes away, and I feel like I got to hurry up almost, you know. I want to capture this. I want to capture my attention and my excitement.
Right.
And I just keep working. And then usually I get like, okay, I need a break. And I take a walk or take lunch and that could all go out the window if there's a client here. You know, sometimes I'll have a whole band in here, and there are 3 or 4 people, and they're they're bothering each other. They're talking and they're arguing, and I have to like control the situation sometimes. Like, I'm trying to work, you know, in a nice way. Like, okay, what are we focused on here? Mm-hmm. Or they might like, this is the one song that we really had a lot of trouble with, so we don't want to work on this one right now. Yeah. And I'll say, okay, but this is this, and they want to start in a certain direction. So I'll start with, you know, whatever they want to do, and we'll listen to a couple songs. We'll work on a couple. And usually after the first or second song, you know, we're like, I'll get it where I think that it's right, or, you know, quote unquote right. And they'll say, yeah, it sounds great. Can we hear it like this? And okay, yeah, let's hear it like that. Do we like that better? Maybe, maybe not. And we find an area, and we're like, okay. And we get on the same page, and then it kind of usually flows from there.
Okay.
But to your point before, like, first song or two, especially with people you haven't worked with before, or maybe they have never even been in a mastering room before, they're anxious. Mm-hmm. They're hearing their music in an environment they haven't heard it in before. They're nervous. And they don't know, oh man, it's gonna be terrible? Is he gonna tell me to remix my record or whatever?
Sure.
So there's some of that psychology of just bringing newer people into this environment and helping them get the most out of it. And sometimes it can often help them become better mix engineers because they're listening in a really nice room on a really good system, and maybe they've been mixing in their bedroom on their laptop or their headphones, or, you know, a pair of near fields with no bottom end. So they're in here and they're like, oh, I never even noticed that before. And they're like, why is that happening? I'm like, well, here's why I think it's happening. And then they can go home and adjust. Maybe there's a tweak they make in their room or to something, and then they come back and I'm like, oh yeah, this is really better, right? And they're like, oh yeah, we love this mix, came out great. Yeah. So that's a fun thing too. I don't remember what the question was.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I mean, one thing I've always wondered is if it's more of a pop record and you have a record with a lot of different producers and possibly mix engineers, and you can have things on this side of the spectrum and things on this side of the spectrum, but you know, your job as the mastering engineer is to sort of glue it all together and make it kind of sound like one record. How do you, I mean, is that where what you were saying, you try to listen to the songs and find like, okay, this feels like kind of in the middle of maybe the extremes as far as the vibe, the different vibes of the songs. Like if I get this one right, then I can kind of expand out from there, or how would you go about that?
Well, those kind of records are great challenges, because if it's a pop record, once you're 3 or 4 songs in, it's usually easier to stay locked in, because if it's 1 or 2 people mixing and producing, they're usually in a certain vein. You might have like 3 or 4 songs that are a little bassy, and then 3 or 4 songs that are a little too bright, but it's easier to get them together, cohesive. Now, when you take a project like you're talking about, I did this project for, there's a Grateful Dead compilation called The Day of the Dead that the Dessner brothers from the National curated for the Red Hot company. And I've done a bunch of records for Red Hot, and several records with Aaron and Bryce, and that I think when we started was 71 songs and about 50, 60 different artists, different mix engineers, different producers. Well, maybe not different producers, but there's a lot of different people involved. So there's you got to work what's best for the song, but then it's got to tie in together too. Mm-hmm. But the good news is when you really get a song sounding quote unquote as good as when you get it properly balanced and you set it next to another song that's properly balanced, they generally work together, because that's kind of the point. Our ear works a certain way. It wants to hear things a certain way. So as long as what I'm listening for is, I'm tying the vocals on a record like that. Okay. I want to make sure the vocals are staying pretty consistent. So if there's a really loud song with a lot of instrumentation and the vocal's sitting right here, that's a certain challenge. But now the next song is just a piano and 3 singers. So that's really easy to make sound super loud. So you actually kind of have to make sure you're not making it too loud and keep the mid-range in place. And that's the goal for me, is the next song can have different instrumentation, but as long as the vocals are sitting in the same wheelhouse, our perception locks in and they flow. And it's a challenge, and those are really fun records to do, and I've done some really cool compilations. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's like you got to pay attention every song, because then you gotta. And actually, in some ways, it's better because it forces you to pay attention. Where the biggest mistake I think you can make, and I made it today, is you could come in with a preconceived idea. I did songs for this guy before, and it was they were just too basic, and I remember what I had to do. I could look at my notes. He was happy. Everyone was happy. This new song, I'm going to have to roll low end off of. So I'm already preconceived, thinking that's what has to happen. Mm-hmm. And that's the worst, because I'm not listening objectively, and I listened and I'm rolling it off, and I was struggling with the song, and I'm like, this is so stupid. I'm doing the dumb, I'm just making rule 1 mistake, coming in with a preconceived idea. Go up, go get a glass of water, take off the EQ, listen for a second. I'm like, oh, this is what has to happen. And then it locks right in. So, yeah, every song, I try to, even if it's the same band, have to remind myself to clear my head, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And, yeah, start from scratch.
Yeah, so is that about getting out of this environment and into a different environment, or do you just, you have, like you said, tracks that when you just need to reset your ears? I mean, how do you...
It's both. Sometimes you just, you've been in here for too long, mm-hmm. and you need to just go have lunch. And it's amazing how I work after lunch. I just get out, because there's so much energy at the beginning of the day and locking in. And I tell people it takes me 5 minutes to get the song 95% there. And it takes me 25% or 25 minutes to second guess myself and to try this. Is this right? Well, maybe I should, because I care. I want it to be as good as it can. But really, my instincts are generally in the right direction. And if I trust them, I'm good. And that takes more energy at the beginning of the day for obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. And then you get a couple songs and you start rolling. And then you take a break and I come back. I'm like, oh yeah, I can just roll. It's funny because you just get your second wind. You get a little food in you. You get out of the room again. I think honestly, just walking around sometimes and just hearing the world, it like sets my ear balance again.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like you can fool yourself in here or in these environments.
Yeah.
It's like looking at, a color. If you say, "Oh, this is blue," well, it is blue, but that's blue as well. So it's getting your reference back, so that you can be objective. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a lot of the experience you've gained to know. It's like a point when I'm just going to be spinning my wheels. You gotta
walk away.
Got to walk away, do something else. I think what you were talking about earlier, definitely. I know I've experienced and learned from those mistakes of staying up and just being like, no, I'm going to push through and I've got to do this, and then up till 3 a.m, and then you come back the next day and you listen to it and you're like,
it's the worst,
garbage. You just end up starting over. So. I think that's sort of having that little inner referee. That's something we all, probably have to learn the hard way.
Yeah.
But that's great it's great to be reminded of.
And to that point, you have to know yourself and your strengths and weaknesses. And again, that's why I schedule. I know for me personally, how I schedule work is what's good for me. I know that if I work 8 days in a row and work through the weekend, I'm likely going to have to redo stuff. And I can't do that much. The joy goes out of it. I'm rushing. I'm trying to do too much. Or if I just keep myself, on a fairly regular schedule, I'm going to do much more consistent work and much more efficient work.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the actual sort of nuts and bolts of things. So you're getting the files. They could be digital files, and you can take 1/2-inch or 1/4-inch tape. So you get that, and then where's it going off to once into this console that you have?
Yeah, well, if I get a digital source, I use Pro Tools basically as a digital tape machine. So it either comes off the tape machine into my Masterlick console, or it comes off the Pro Tools and to a D to A and goes into the console. So gets into the console, and this is for most projects. Some people have specific ideas. They want to work digitally, want to stay digitally, or if it's tied to video, we're going to stay digital. So then I only use, the digital gear. I'll work with the digital equalizers and compressors. But most projects, I'm using my analog rig. I've got some really great gear that I've, collected over my career. Stuff is working really well. It sounds great. I can work really fast and efficient, and I just love the sound of the equipment I have. So, to your question, yeah, I get it into the console. It's turned into sound, analog sound again, and I just start listening. I just start reacting to what I hear. I get it up to a level of close to where I want the level to be, because that's going to affect how I perceive the low end and the high end and just the overall balance. If the song isn't loud enough, you can't really tell it. So you got to get it in the ballpark, so to speak. And I just try to do what we talked about, trust my instincts. What am I hearing too much of? What am I not hearing enough of? Let me put in an EQ. I think it needs a little of this. So I usually I have a Soundtech EQ that is one of the first Soundtechs ever built. And I had it all rewired, a new power supply. It works like a charm, and it's just, honestly, it's just an incredible sound and equalizer. And what makes it so great is it's not just the sound, but it's how I can work too. I like to stay in a sweet spot. I don't want to be looking over my shoulder all the time. I don't know how people work that way, frankly. I don't want to be just sitting there standing in a screen.
Yeah.
I could just sit with my head between the speakers, and basically my main gear is within arm's reach. And I could just kind of start rolling things in and out. And I'm working in a macro sense at first. And I'm just thinking basic balance, low, high. Let me get that close. Get that. That sounds about right. And then if I feel like it needs a compressor, I'll pop in a compressor. Because I want to get my basic EQ right before a stereo compressor can really be effective. For example, if the song has no low end and you start compressing it, it's going to compress the mid-range and the highs too much because it's going to hit that threshold sooner. Or adversely, if you have a song that has far too much bass and you put a compressor on it, it's going to compress the bass before, a couple dB maybe before it's touching the mids and highs. So it's really messing with the vibe of the song. So I want to get the song, close, so to speak, in a linear fashion from low to high before I can plug that in. And I go from there, and I just start, tweaking.
Yeah. So if I'm understanding correctly, you're going to start sort of with broad, maybe gentle EQ, very gentle compression, and then maybe if you start to hear problems, you get a little more surgical, like in pulling at things, or?
Yeah, it may not be subtle. There's songs where like, whoa, there's a lot of bass here, and I got to roll off a ton of bass before I can even hear the mid-range. Like now, okay, I've rolled off a chunk of all the super sub. Now I can hear where the melody is. I can hear where the song is. I can now start adjusting. To your point, if there's subtler things, or I can work with a compressor in an effective way. So I start big, and then get to the minutia.
Yeah.
The candy. Like here's the little things, the little tricks that I like to really separate the kick from the mid range, to really get the poke out, to get the vocal in its certain spot. But I got to get close first before I can start doing that.
Okay. And you were talking at the beginning about setting your listening level. Do you have to listen at a different level if you have clients versus if you're by yourself, or are you always?
My level's always the same.
Okay.
It's about 85 dB ish.
Is that the Bobcat's standard, or sort of?
It might be. It's just
where the ear is the most.
Yeah, that's where sensitive. Our ear is the most linear.
Yeah.
So it's just the most effective way to work for a couple reasons. I've tried to work louder. I've worked in rooms where guys listen loud, and I know guys who monitor really loud, mastering engineers, mix engineers, all that stuff. And again, I'm working a lot. I know that it's once you get used to that sound in your particular environment, you get used to how your speakers sound, you get used to the air pressure, you get confident, you get comfortable, and you can work faster. And you can work longer because your ears aren't spent. So yeah, I get comfortable. I know that I can trust where the low end is. And if somebody, if I get it where I want, someone says, do you think it could take more bass? I can then adjust. I know what I'm listening to. If you're changing the volume, it's like you're changing the EQ too. So you're really making it harder for yourself. Yeah. And this is a wonderful sounding room, and people tell me all the time, like even today, he's like, I love how it sounds. I could sit on your couch and it sounds basically the same as where you're sitting. So they can pop in if they want to sit in the chair and hear it here, and I'll show them stuff. But yeah, the only time I ever touch my volume is I just, I'll hit a dim switch, which drops, everything 10 dB. So if I need to talk. But to your point, will I listen louder because my clients are here? No, because just like in a restaurant, people will adjust to the amount of sound in a room.
Right.
If I turn it up, they're just going to talk louder.
Right.
So it doesn't really help. You think you're going to overcompensate. They're just going to do what you do in a club, yell. if they want to crank it up, I'll say, okay, here's the knob. I'm going to go stand in the corner, or I'm going to go leave the room. You can play it as loud as you want. I want you to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the room starts shaking, stop shaking, I'll come back in, and we'll get to work again.
Yeah.
How do you work with a monitoring system?
I have, I think like a lot of people probably watching this, I have some treatment in my room, but my room is not ideal in terms of the layout or in terms of the dimensions, I'm always not 100% trusting, even though I know my monitors. I've had the same near fields for about 10 years. And I actually, for low end, because I never get to listen in an environment like this where I get to probably hear low end produce properly. I have some Beyerdynamic, I think they're I forget the model, but they're semi-open. And I use that when I need to like really check the low end, because they have great low end reproduction. But listening to low end on my speakers, I'm always like, I feel like I think I know if it's okay, but I mean, do you have any advice for people, I guess like in my situation, or probably a lot of people watching this, like if you're in an environment where you can't necessarily reproduce low end, just ways you can deal with it when you're mixing or working on your productions, like should you err on the side of, is it easier if I deliver it to you a little thinner versus delivering it to you, maybe I have monitors that have no low end, and so I have all this rumble that I can't even hear. Is there one that's better for you, or?
No, not really.
Okay.
But that is the challenge, to hear to monitor in a way that you can really trust when you're mixing and when you're tracking. And we've been told that near fields are great, and they're good. There's nothing wrong. Well, that's a lie. There is something wrong. They don't give you all the information.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of fantastic mix engineers who've mixed fantastic records on near fields. But it's not because the near fields are good, in my opinion. It's because they're good engineers who learned to overcome the weaknesses of those speakers.
Right.
And they're generally checking on other things too. I think if you're using a near field, it depends how near it is too. Literally, your distance to the speaker will affect, how it sounds. If you got to get some distance from the drivers, just to give the music time to blossom in the room. Low end, especially. I'm about 9 feet from my speakers.
Mm-hmm. And is that?
It's a triangle.
Triangle, yeah.
And because low end the wave is literally bigger. It takes a certain amount of space to just develop. So if you're sitting right on top of your speaker, you're going to hear it bouncing around the room eventually.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But simple subwoofers too. I tell people, you can get a sub. It's not like it's $20,000 to get a subwoofer. And there's plenty of speakers that come that have subs designed to work with that particular pair of monitors. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be booming. It doesn't have to be like a club sub. It's just enough that it's giving you a little bit of that root note, so that, again, you get used to it in your environment. You start to hear it. You start to react to it. Otherwise, you'll learn. You'll just make adjustments based on the limitations of your environment. And you can get to a point where they're amazing. Plenty of people make great things, but they're just things you have to overcome.
Right.
But it's not that difficult to find a sub. I think, I always recommend, if you go, $150 to, $500, you can get a range of subs that are powered, that, you could find a decent crossover point, an adjustable crossover point, figure out where it works best with your speaker. It's not that huge an investment if you want to make records.
Yeah. And it, correct me if I don't understand this, but with subs and that sort of extreme low end, it's not really directional, so the placement isn't as important, or is that?
It's less important,
Okay.
for sure, especially when you get below 100 hertz.
Yeah. So ideally, would you?
Ideally in the same room.
Okay.
I mean,
Fair enough.
Ideally in the same plane as the speakers.
Yeah.
You know, you don't want to, like, if you're 2 feet from a pair of speakers, you don't necessarily want it 6 feet behind you,
Sure.
you know, for time, delay, and all that. Yeah, if you can keep it on the same plane, that'd be great. And most people are working, I don't know how big your room is, but it's probably not more than 20 by 20, is it?
No.
Right? So, yeah, even some of the most wonderful mixed rooms in the world, they're not generally big rooms.
Right.
So, yeah, you want to keep it close.
Yeah. That's good.
But what happens, if you're not hearing the root note, you're hearing the second or third harmonic. So you're making adjustments based on that. So you're going to generally overcompensate.
Mm-hmm.
So you're generally going to have a little too much low end on the record.
Yeah.
And then there's people who do just the opposite. You know, they have a room where they got a lot of sub, and they rely on it too much. And their sub may be really, you know, ratio-wise, it just, you can get really attached to a kick drum when you're mixing. You know, it's like when you go to a live show. Every time the kick drum hits, you lose the vocal. Like, and most of the time, I just want to go over to the mix desk and be like, just do everyone in the room a favor and bring the kick drum back like 9 dB. Okay?
Yeah.
Because you're so concerned. Oh, I got to have a huge kick drum. It's got to be punching. So you get hyper focused on it, and then it's too bassy.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no one answer, because ultimately how you're perceiving the sound is something you have to overcome as well.
Yeah. That's a good point. I also, as we're in this room, and one thing I always love about mastering rooms is very rarely is there a monitor behind the console. How important do you think it is? Well, I know this is a rhetorical question, but you know, so much of it nowadays is visual with the click, you know, doing things with our eyes. Just to take time and sort of get away from that and just, you know, go to the ears and just really listen. Because, I mean, I can see that that's how your situation is. And like you said, you can reach all your gear. You're just listening and making moves. I mean, do you think, should I, what I'm saying, should I get rid of my monitor, or should, you know, do you think we should get less reliant on that side of things?
Well, that's difficult for sure to become like, because everything is designed around the workstation.
Mm-hmm.
And I see more and more mastering engineers with screens, which to me, like, the last thing I want is a screen in front of my face, because I would just be distracted.
Yeah.
And plus, it's a flat surface. You know, it's just like the worst thing you can have in front of your audio coming at you is a flat surface to reflect the sound everywhere, but except for your ears. And also, for me, I know if I can see, you start making decisions based on what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's, you don't want. So I have to fight that. You know, I have to fight looking at all the cool looking meters and just sit and listen, because you can convince yourself otherwise. Like, well, it doesn't even look like it's doing anything, you know, because there's some EQs that visually look really like you just raise it 2 dB and it looks like, oh, looks like it's doing a lot.
Yeah.
And then there's other plugins where, you know, the way they set up the visual looks like it's not doing anything, but they sound different.
Mm-hmm.
So you can fool yourself. So yeah, it's a big challenge not to get sidetracked or distracted by what the project looks like. For a mix engineer, I guess it's a challenge too. I don't know. You're working here and the workstation's in front of you?
Yeah, I have a monitor at eye level, and then I have the keyboard, mouse, and a control surface. And I try to more and more, I do a lot, or at least in my first passes, the balancing I do with the control surface before I start going into any kind of plugins or anything. again, learning the hard way, because I used to be that person that I'd open a mix session and load it up and spend 2 hours on the kick drum, and I haven't even
Listen to the song.
Yeah, exactly. And fortunately, I'm trying to grow out of that. But yeah, I've and I really admire that because I come from a guitar player background too, and like, give me a guitar pedal and knobs and let me twist around and make noise.
Fun.
It's fun, and we lose so much of that in the digital thing, and so that's why I've really enjoyed getting back into just having a simple control surface and faders to push, and I just feel like getting back to that, using the ears and not, but yeah, I mean, but it's always there, kind of staring you in the face.
Well, it's a challenge for a company to create a surface. I know that there's the Slate.
Yeah.
And I know people who use it and they love it. So I don't know if that is, I think that's in the direction of what we're talking, where we can have a surface in front of us, or a controller, so to speak, in front of us that isn't blocking our view, that we can look at, but look away from too.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a challenge. It's a lot of this stuff is, relatively new.
Sure.
These workstations, when you were a kid, they didn't even exist. So it's a challenge for the next generation of companies to come out and give us the power that we want without putting a 3-foot square monitor in front of our face, distracting us.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you even see now a lot of times going to TV size monitors and people saying like, 4K, and I have, I can see so many tracks and all the plugins open, and I just, you wonder, is that better, or is it? Yeah. I'm almost wondering, go the other way and just have an older monitor with less, screen resolution, and kind of only limit the focus so that we're not like I was describing myself, jumping around like, what's the snare compressor doing? And I start looking at it, so, but it's really refreshing and really great to be in a room where that's, I can see you have your sort of your Zen.
I got big knobs on everything. It's nice and fun, it's just more fun. And I just work so, it's for me and what I do, it's so much faster.
Yeah. So Joe, where can people find out more about the studio and what all you're up to?
JoeLambertMastering.com. You can find me on Facebook.
Okay.
Joe Lambert Mastering. You can find me on Instagram. Joe Lambert Mastering. Yeah, we're out there on all the digital platforms. Go to my website. Our phone number's there. Emails are there. You can email Diana about sessions. You can email me directly if you got any questions. Analog phone, old school, call us. We're easy to find.
Okay. And do you have guidelines for people to formats to submit their work to you?
If you go on the website, there is a section that will help you, gives you options and tells you some very simple things, like you just use here's a link to upload or download files. But also, if you do have questions, formats that you may want to do, depending on where you're at in your project, I give you options and certain things that I think sound better for this type of music, certain for that type of music, if you want to supply tape. So yeah, there's a frequently asked questions section, give you ideas.
Great.
But I'm always, like I said, feel free to call us. Feel free to email me. It's, that's what we're here for. We want to help. We're easy to reach.
Great. Well, thanks again for having us, Joe.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, please check out JoeLambertMastering.com to find out more, and RedPandaRecording.com. And until next time, this has been Studio Hang. Take care, guys.